$8,000. That's the median American savings balance. Not just the savings account. Checking, money market, everything combined. $8,000 is what the typical American household has liquid right now, today. One transmission replacement, one ER visit, 1 month of unemployment. That's the distance between $8,000 and a conversation nobody wants to have with their landlord. And most people think they're doing okay, which, honestly, is doing a lot of heavy lifting as a financial strategy. There's a number on the other side of $8,000 where something shifts. Not in the account, in the person, in how they think, how they negotiate, what they're willing to risk. The number is $17,500. And the shift is more specific than most people expect. That's what this video is actually about. But to understand what changes at $17,500, you have to spend a minute at zero. Because the damage of having nothing is not what most people think it is. The broke part isn't what kills you. It's the decisions you make while you're broke. And those decisions, almost every single one of them, make complete logical sense in the moment. Take the job offer even though it's low because you need it now. Stay in the role you hate because switching costs money you don't have. Sign the car loan at a bad rate because you need the car and you have no leverage to wait. Put the medical bill on the card because there's nothing else. Every one of those decisions is rational. Every one of them makes the hole slightly deeper. Behavioral economists at Harvard and Princeton ran a series of experiments on what financial scarcity actually does to the brain. When your account is low enough that you're doing mental math at the grocery store, your cognitive bandwidth measurably shrinks. Scarcity occupies mental space the same way an active task does. The researchers put the cognitive loss at roughly 13 IQ points, equivalent to a full night without sleep. Your brain is running a scarcity tax in the background, using resources you don't know you're spending, on a problem you can't solve in the moment anyway. Being broke is a part-time job nobody hired you for. I say that like I read it somewhere. I lived it. The mental math at the grocery store, checking the account before buying anything over $30, that's not stress. That's just Tuesday when the buffer isn't there. And the worst part is, you stop noticing it's happening. It just becomes how you think. The cycle isn't a character flaw. It's what happens when a brain operates under load it wasn't designed to carry indefinitely. And almost nobody tells you that the first exit from that cycle isn't a raise, or a side hustle, or a budgeting app. It's a number, a specific one. And the reason that number is $17,500 and not $10,000 or $25,000, that part is worth explaining properly. The Federal Reserve tracks median household monthly expenses. The number sits around $6,000. 3 months of expenses, the floor most financial planners set for a real emergency fund, lands at roughly $18,000. $18,000. So $17,500 is technically not the finish line. I'm aware of the irony of building a whole video around a number that's $500 short of the actual target. Stay with me. The anxiety reduction from savings is not linear. Research on financial stress shows it drops sharply at specific thresholds. The first around 1 month of expenses. The second around 2 to 3 months. $17,500 for the median American household sits right at that second threshold. The baseline hum of financial anxiety, the one you've been carrying long enough that you've stopped noticing it, goes quiet around here. The brain finally has enough runway to stop treating every week like a potential emergency. And what that actually looks like in practice is something most people don't expect. It's not a sudden feeling of wealth. It's more like a noise you've been living with disappears and you didn't realize how loud it was until it stopped. The low-grade calculation that runs in the background of every decision. Can I afford this? What if something happens? How long could I survive if? That calculation doesn't go away completely. It just stops being the loudest thing in the room. There's a woman, I'll call her Sandra, who described this to a financial researcher in a way I keep coming back to. She said she'd been at around $6,000 in savings for 3 years. Good job, decent income, responsible. But every time her phone buzzed with a bank notification, she felt her stomach drop slightly before she even looked at the screen. She didn't connect that reaction to her savings balance. She thought it was just anxiety. Then she hit $17,000 1 month and noticed the stomach drop was gone. Phone buzzes, she looks, she moves on. Same phone, different number. She thought she had a stress problem. She had a savings problem. The two are harder to tell apart than most people realize. There's a difference between surviving and operating. At $8,000, you are surviving. The decisions you make, the risks you take, the conversations you're willing to have, all of it filtered through a brain that is 1 bad month away from a problem. At $17,500, you are operating. Same income, same job, same everything. Different cognitive baseline. And that different baseline opens some very specific doors. Not theoretical ones, Concrete doors, the kind that show up in your paycheck, your career trajectory, and the options available to you when something goes wrong. Or right. 3 things become available at $17,500 that are functionally inaccessible at $8,000. The first is negotiating leverage. When there's no buffer behind you, walking away from anything is not really an option. Job offer comes in lower than you wanted, you take it because the math of your life doesn't allow you to wait. You tell yourself you'll negotiate the next one. You don't, because the next one finds you in the same position. A 2023 study from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that workers with at least 2 months of liquid savings were 18% more likely to negotiate their salary and received on average 7.4% higher starting compensation than those without, which I find genuinely funny every time I read it. Same person, same resume, same market. The only variable is whether they had enough behind them to pause before saying yes. That's it. That's the whole finding. The money in your account doesn't go on your resume, but it shows up in how you carry yourself in that room. And people who make hiring decisions read rooms for a living. If none of this landed, fair enough. If it did, there's a subscribe button somewhere on this screen that costs exactly nothing to press. The second thing that unlocks is the ability to absorb short-term costs for long-term returns. Freelance project on the side. A role at a startup that pays less now but has equity. Night classes for a certification that opens a higher-paying lane. Any of these require you to take a hit today in exchange for something bigger later. At $8,000, absorbing that hit is too dangerous. One unexpected expense, and the whole plan collapses. I know someone who got offered a junior role at a company he genuinely wanted to work at. The pay was $11,000 less than his current job. He had $7,000 saved. He did the math, couldn't make it work. Turned it down. 3 years later, that company went public. The guy who took the role he passed on cleared $340,000 in equity. He followed the story from his same desk at his same job. At $17,500, that gap was survivable. The bet was possible. He didn't lose because of his choices. He lost because of his balance. There is no version of that story where the outcome feels fair. The math doesn't care about fair. The third unlock is optionality when things go wrong. The average American changes jobs every 4 years. The average job search takes 3 to 6 months. At $8,000, a 4-month search is a financial emergency. And emergencies make you accept things you shouldn't. At $17,500, a 4-month search is an inconvenience. The person running an inconvenient search waits for the right offer. The person running an emergency takes the first one that clears the bar. Over a career, that difference compounds. Not from any single decision, from the accumulated effect of never being forced to accept the wrong answer because the clock ran out. And when you actually run the math on what that compounding produces over time, the number is uncomfortable in a very specific way. 2 people, same income, $65,000 a year, same age, 28. Person A has $8,000 saved. Person B has $17,500. Person A can't negotiate the next job offer, takes it at $72,000. A 10% raise feels like a win. Person B negotiates. Same offer, same role, holds for $77,500. The research says that's realistic. That $5,500 gap in starting salary, compounded across raises, bonuses, and every future offer anchored to your current number, is worth somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 over a 30-year career, conservatively. I ran that number 3 times when I first saw it because it seemed too clean to be real. It held up every time. The math on salary anchoring is genuinely one of the more uncomfortable things in personal finance, because it means the negotiation conversation you avoided at 28 is still costing you money at 48. It just doesn't send you an invoice, so you never connect the two. Then factor in what happens when something breaks. Job loss, medical bill, car. One of those happens to everyone. The variable is just timing. Person A goes into debt. That debt costs interest. The interest costs decisions. The decisions cost more than the debt. Person B absorbs the hit, rebuilds, moves forward without an anchor. The U.S. personal savings rate as of early 2026 sits at 3.6%. On a $65,000 salary, that's roughly $195 a month going to savings. Getting from $8,000 to $17,500 at that rate takes about 4 years. 4 years of $195 a month for a completely different set of options. Find $500 a month instead. Cut, earn, redirect, whatever the path is, and you get there in 19 months. 2 years earlier. 2 years of negotiating leverage and survivable bets and optionality that the slower version of you didn't have access to. The math doesn't negotiate, it just runs. Which leaves one thing worth saying before this ends, because there's a version of this video that makes $17,500 sound like a finish line. It isn't. And I'd rather say that clearly than have you hit the number and wonder why it didn't feel the way you expected. $17,500 doesn't fix everything. Plenty of people cross that number and lifestyle inflates straight back to zero. The number without the behavior is just a number. The behavior without the number is discipline with no leverage. And discipline without leverage is exhausting in a way that's very hard to sustain. I don't know where you're at right now. Maybe $2,000, maybe $12,000. Maybe you're already past $17,500 and wondering why it didn't feel like the shift everyone describes. That happens too. You cross the number and the lifestyle has already eaten the buffer and you're back to surviving without realizing it. The number only works if the behavior comes with it, which I realize is the least satisfying thing to end on, but it's the true thing. The median is not a destination. It's just where most people stopped. This is Breaking Money. See you in the next one.